Fishing, you have to appreciate, is the last great organized hunting activity on Earth. We don't hunt for meat in general anymore. Sure, there's lots of hunting that goes on, but the main supply of meat to people in the United States and elsewhere in the world comes from agriculture, from livestock. In fishing, yes, there is marine aquaculture and freshwater agriculture, but still, the biggest supply of marine fish and seafood products come from wild-caught animals. So it's the last great hunting activity on Earth. Yellowfin is a very important pelagic fish species here in Hawaii. Big eye, and yes, that's probably the most important tuna, but yellowfin certainly is number 2.
Yellowfin tuna outside of Kona is probably the premier fish that most people pursue, especially during the summertime when we have the larger classes of yellowfin tuna. A good example is last year's Ahi Fever fishing tournament, which is the largest fishing tournament in the state of Hawaii, held off of Waianae. If you didn't have a fish that was more than 250 pounds, you didn't even place in the winners brackets.
Yellowfin has always been important to not just the canneries that we used to have here, but it's very important to the recreational fishermen and our subsistence fishery as well. In terms of the rest of the United States, Hawaii ranks 7 in terms of recreational fishing, and for our commercial fleet, we are within the top 10 of U.S. ports that are valued.
People used to have this mentality in the world that with tuna, well, why should I conserve this tuna because tomorrow it's going to cross the ocean? But if you believe and know that your fish don't leave you, well, that's a whole different concept.
Less than 3% of our fish ends up on foreign soil. It's primarily a domestic market. We are part of the United States. There are other people on the mainland who have certainly come to appreciate the benefits of eating fish, as well as have begun to understand and appreciate poke, sashimi, sushi, and so forth. The Hawaii fleet, we represent almost 25% of the yellowfin that's domestically caught. So this fisheries represents a significant amount of fish, not only for Hawaii, but for the rest of the nation as well.
I like to eat fish a lot. I like to eat fish in different preparations, raw, cooked, halfway cooked. In general, the yellowfin tuna, as opposed to the big eye tuna, will be more darker crimson red. The flesh will definitely be firmer. It'll have like a nice crunch to the meat. We usually choose the yellowfin over big eye for a poke type of preparation, just due to the fact that, once you cut it up and you put it into a bowl, and you're gonna be mixing it a lot, and it's gonna be handled a lot. Some of the softer fish will tend to kind of mush, which if you're eating poke, you don't want to have a bowl of mushy fish. So the yellowfin will lend itself great to a poke application. And your big eye tuna, you're typically gonna see the fatty part of the fish more towards the belly. On the yellowfin tuna, you're gonna actually see when it does have the fat will actually go through the majority part of the flesh, not just the belly part. So even then, in that respect, it lends itself great to the poke, where even though you're cutting it up, each piece will taste really good.
Stronger and stronger evidence is coming forward that the more fish you eat, the better you are for cardiovascular health, heart health, and also brain health and function. There are obviously concerns about mercury, and mercury is known as a neurotoxin. There's stronger and stronger evidence that when we look at the mercury issue right now, we're only looking at a single element and not looking at the whole package of nutrients that are in there. Now, selenium is an essential mineral. We need to have that in our body. So the relationship here between mercury and selenium is that chemically, those two have such a great, strong binding affinity. If they are in the same system, they will seek each other out. That's called chelation. When you're binding that mineral, it is no longer biologically available. In experimental diets that have been fed to animals that have an excess of mercury over selenium in the diet, there is profound mercury toxicity. The same level of mercury with an excess of selenium, and the animals they thrive. They're perfectly fine. Now there is more and more strong evidence that it's the ratios of mercury and selenium in the diet that are most important in determining risk, not just the mercury alone. Tunas, they provide not only the omega-3 fatty acids, but they also provide selenium in excess of the mercury content.
Well, our days is like a 2 to 3 day trip. We're full-time commercial fishermen. We make 100% of our livelihood from fishing, whether it be pelagic fishing or bottom fishing. I generally specialize in bottom fishing for the deep 7 here in Hawaii. Well, I fish pretty much exclusively for Mama's Fish House on Maui. We do have 3 other wholesalers on the island, which takes a large chunk of the yellowfin and big eye that comes from our console fads that we have. Our fads are specifically designed for big eye tuna and yellowfin, and it's doing their job just fine. I mean, it's been probably the most productive fads in Hawaii for the last 4 to 5 years. When it's on, it's on. And when it's off, it's off. It's like a light switch, you know? If one day you be there, it'll be biting. The next day you go, you won't catch anything, you know? It's that. It's just a water temperature thing or current thing, or, you know, just the food might have left and then they're done, you know? They're not there. And then you wait a day or 2 and then they'll come back, you know? It's because these fish are like, you know, they're migrating everywhere. They're following the food.
I was conducting research for the Pelagic Fisheries Research Program, and I was curious about the tuna here because I just come from a region where the majority of the tuna in the world reside, which is that big area between New Guinea and Micronesia, Philippines, over to Kiribati. That's where more than half of the world's tuna comes from. And up here in Hawaii, we had tuna too, but I was just curious, where do our tuna come from? We assume that they probably come from the equator, and some are born locally, and we have a good influx of fish coming in, etc. And that, but that's all assumption. So that's the first study I did actually for the Pelagic Fisheries Research Program. Was a big study on yellowfin reproductive biology. These animals are really amazing. They're so fast growing and they mature very, very quickly. Mature yellowfin tuna, the females will put out between like 3 and 8 million eggs per night, night after night after night, repeatedly for weeks at a time. And they'll be doing that after they're only about 2.5 years old. Here we have a long spawning season for yellowfin, pretty much from April until October, during the warmer water months.
In Hawaii, it's kind of an interesting situation because every summer we get these runs, and those are spawning aggregations of, you know, the big yellowfin, and you see all of the guys going out there and catching them, and those fish spawn, drop their eggs, and you know, the eggs are caught in the local currents and drift around for a while.
So they're fast growing, they reproduce a lot. We have a good spawning season of them here. But one of the questions that we always ask in tuna science is, how is our population of tuna that we have here connected to the broader Pacific, to the Eastern Pacific, the equatorial regions? That is, how much can we depend on the population to be repopulated from that sink population, or how independent is it? And none of that was really known at that time. Our next big project I got involved in was with Dr. Kim Holland, the Hawaii Tuna Tagging Project. And that was a great experiment. These are simple dart tags. They're plastic tags that are put into the back of a tuna. It has a number on it. You measure how long it is. You let it go. Then in your database, you know the species, the length, what day you let it go. And then when fishermen capture it, there's a reward for the return of that tag. Then you get the information on where it was caught. Very simple technology, but it's still one of the best ways we have of understanding what tuna do. We tagged 8,000 yellowfin tuna and 8,000 big eye tuna. Then you just let the experiment run and see where they get caught. What was intriguing was that out of all those thousands of yellowfin tuna, most of them tagged within the main Hawaiian Islands, basically from Kauai to the Big Island and neighboring seamount to the south of us. Of all those thousands of yellowfin tuna, throughout the whole span of the project and throughout their lifespan, they were only caught in Hawaiian waters.
And this is not only true for Hawaii, but they're finding out off of the coast of Mexico too, that yellowfin in particular have an affinity to where they were born. So the histology of the fish, through the, studying the otolith, there's some chemical markers in there that says this fish was born in these waters, and when we catch them and we give those otoliths to the Science Center, and they look and says, oh yeah, this is a local fish.
Because that tells you that local spawning of yellowfin here in Hawaii contributes a vast amount of fish of our population to our local fishery. Yellowfin tuna seem to stay in this region. They mature quickly, they start spawning. Their young will grow up and probably remain in this region and also contribute to that population. Then again, studies we've done with that large tagging project, we're able to develop size-specific natural mortality estimates for yellowfin tuna and big eye here. And surprisingly, the natural mortality levels dropped very low to their minimum at about 10 pounds. So after 10 pounds or so, what that tells you is that that fish has a very good chance of surviving in the wild. The tunas mature over kind of a size range, so there's not just this point where they all start spawning. For yellowfin tuna in Hawaii, the size ranges from about 35 to 100 pounds. We use a length-based figure, so generally most of the fish mature at about 112 centimeters, about 44 inches, when we estimate that half the population is spawning. And that occurs somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years of age, so it's quite young. And the growth to that period is rapid. This is one reason why when you look at different tunas, some are doing better than others as far as exploitation, because obviously a fast maturing fish will do better.
About 10 years ago, there was an initiative in the legislature to take a look at placing some minimum sizes on both yellowfin tuna and aku, or skipjack tuna. Through the legislative process, basically fishermen who were thinking about sustainable practices wanted a minimum size for both species. The other side lined up in opposition to the bill. They were basically the aku boat industry at the time, which had more boats operating, as well as the retailers and wholesalers. So I believe what happened in sort of a compromise, which usually occurs in the legislative process, yellowfin tuna was assigned a 3-pound minimum, and aku was not assigned any minimum right now. So for home consumption, it's important to know, you can consume an aku of any size, you can consume a yellowfin tuna of any size. You just can't sell a yellowfin tuna that is less than 3 pounds.
There were no studies done at that time. There was no scientific evidence. There was no justification or real reason to regulate at 3 pounds. It has nothing to do with the size at maturity or the size of anything, really. It was a holdover of someone's desire to initially regulate skipjack.
To ensure sustainable fishing for the yellowfin, that there needs to be a change in the rule?
There's been some discussion about old laws, if they're not appropriate, get rid of them, revise them. It's been a long-standing debate within the state what to do with this law.
A commercial fisherman like myself, I support, raising it. And I know I consulted with a few people on the island before we got to this point, and 90% of it, they want it raised. They all believe that 3 pounds is a little too small. And on the enforcement side, they discussed that it's hard to tell what a 2.5 or 2 3/4 pound fish sitting side by side with a 3 pound fish. So it's hard to distinctly tell which one's legal and which one's not. And I think with the raising of the size limit, I think that'll help them quite a bit as well.
The 3-pound size and a 10-pound size or 7-pound size, it's pretty much the same usage, but it's not necessarily more poke, but more like frying or, soups or things like that. The 3-pound size, 3, 4, 5 pounders are a lot easier to sell than the 5, 6, 7, 8 pounders. Just because it's a more usable size for any family. It will affect how much we can sell, but you know, I think we have to look at the resource. We have to make sure that we have enough for future generations, and you know, I think we can try a larger minimum size. I don't know, I try maybe a 7-pound minimum size and see how that works out. But I think it needs to be not just yellowfin, but it needs to be big eye also, because when they're that size, it's very difficult for us to tell, for the enforcement people to tell, you know, which is a yellowfin, which is a big eye.
Commercial fishing community on Maui, they'll be affected pretty heavily because they have a lot of people that sell fish on the side of the road. You know, it's a peddling style. It's going to affect the community a little bit, you know, because what it is now is, you know, they can go out and buy a roadside fish for, you know, generally under $20, you know. I mean, and then you're gonna, if it raises to 10 pounds, it's gonna be generally about $30 or so, you know. But, you know, where do we draw the line? You know, where do we draw the line? Are we gonna take fish for today and no fish for tomorrow? You know, so supporting the actual minimum size is actually, I think, for Hawaii and Hawaii's future of fishing and eating, consuming fish, it's to the better that they do raise the size limit for sure.
What David's work has shown is that with a relatively modest increase in minimum size would put the fish at a period in its life history where its natural mortality rate is at its lowest. And so if fish landed above that minimum size, one would expect more of the specimens to reach maturity. If we say had a larger minimum size, the trade-off would be some people would be disadvantaged from being able to land small yellowfin. How big is that community? Even if it's small, what aspects of that community make it vulnerable? Maybe it's like 10% of the population, but it might also be that it's 90% of all the poor people or below a certain income level. So, you know, you have to be able to describe those impacts.
Some fishermen are absolutely willing to leave the smaller ones in the water for a chance at catching larger fish over a longer period of time. We have the retailers who are concerned about not having the small fish for a group of consumers who like that fish that can fit in the frying pan.
Similarly, the most recent assessments for yellowfin indicate that it is not being overfished and is not in an overfished state, but it's probably pretty close to the level of population size that can produce the maximum sustainable yield. And so there is concern about it not being overfished in the future, and there are close attention being paid to it and its stock assessment to try and make sure that we stay on the good side of the thresholds of overfishing and overfished.
The initial assumption was tuna was a pelagic species, just like marlin, you know, and everything else, just migrating the Pacific wide. And then now we're getting better science that's saying, oh, maybe not so. Yes, big-eyed tuna kind of make the roam all over the Pacific, but yellowfin have this affinity of staying close to home. And that's our EEZ. So it's kind of like our fish, right, in the Hawaii EEZ, 200 miles. So we need to be better caretakers of that resource.
WestPac is encouraging the state of Hawaii to take a look at its minimum size right now and looking at raising it to a higher weight limit. The smaller tuna, if allowed to grow to a larger size, when they get to about that 12 to 16 pound range, if they're allowed to survive in greater numbers, grow much quicker at that point. So the benefit to the fishermen by leaving those smaller tunas out there rather than catching them or selling them is that you will have theoretically a larger number of fish after a certain period of time in the larger class range, which is the more desirable class range for sale for poke markets and sushi markets. So that is the benefit if we can convince fishermen that it's in their best interest to not catch large numbers of small yellowfin tuna in Hawaii, which the science shows are born and sort of stay around the waters of Hawaii. So it's a stock that we really should manage because we're responsible for our own and our children's futures when it comes to yellowfin tuna. If we observe a little bit more restraint, the fishery will improve in the long run and become much more sustainable. Discussing it with people in the fishing community right now, we think it's a good idea. So we are pursuing the discussions to see what kind of pushback or what kind of concerns fishermen or, again, the retailers would put forward.
What has intrigued me is that because of what we now know about yellowfin in Hawaii, it seems that we do have a somewhat local population, and in that respect, anything you can do to enhance that population will remain with you. It's not going to go to Mexico. It's not going to go somewhere else. That raises the possibility of local scale management, and I think that's a really powerful concept. A concept that people and Hawaiian fishermen can take to heart, because I don't really believe in regulating them with laws as much as trying to put forth this idea of self-enforcing the incorporation of what we call best practices in fishing. It's like pono fishing.
Yellowfin is healthy. We think that this is a wonderful fishery to pursue because it's still healthy, and we can all decide how it should be managed. Perhaps we need to change what the size for commercial catch is. Because the scientists have found that we have our own resident population, we should manage our own fisheries, and we don't need to have countries or the federal government or the large commissions making decisions way out there. We can make our own decisions here.
I've been doing it for 65 years, and the challenge, being out there with friends, and just the notion of fishing is inherent. I was born with it, I guess, inside of me. And the guys that fish, they're going to go fishing no matter what, whether it's shoreline, diving, pulling line, or hand line, whatever. We're going to do it because it is just inherent and embedded in us. And tradition, heritage, culture, all of those things play in. So fishing is who we are, and hard to take that away from us,
We should protect our resources for our people. We should make sure that they are sustainable, but we want to look ahead, preparing for the future.